Anyway, right. So that's Cameron saying hello. Well, you're talking about geography that almost ironic is not the right word. It's not the right word, but we'll just use it. When I went to Seattle, I expected it to be cold. I mean, I knew it was rainy Seattle, but when I actually thought about it, I was like, I don't really know why it's rainy and, cool. It's not. It didn't feel as cold as San Francisco, and I went there about the same time.
I've been there too. It's a fairly cold place.
Right,
San Francisco.
San Francisco, I was like, it was windy as hell.
I was there in July, and it was still fairly cold.
I was there in January, and I was like, this place is fucking cold. And then I went to Seattle, and I wore like a sweater, and I was right on. Also, I might add that I could not find a Starbucks in Seattle, so maybe that invalidates everything I just said for the last hour and a half. Regardless, when it comes to world building, the Vampire LARP actually that Cameron helped with, and he was one of the STs, as was I, and Daniel was sort of like...
I was kind of it, but yeah, anyways.
You were like hanging in the rafters, ST. We set that LARP. It was a Vampire Requiem / Masquerade. We set that LARP in New Orleans, and used the map, and one of the things that cajoled us into actually doing it was I had a conversation with Holker about potentially running a Vampire LARP. And he had this amazing idea, and I'd never even thought of it. And it was so obvious, but profound at the same time. Go. Do you remember it?
That we would actually use a map, that we would more or less map out everything.
Yeah. We had this map, and then he goes, so we're going to have a map. We're literally going to... This is what happens in Vampire LARPs. For those, I'm talking to almost everyone who's seriously into Vampire LARPing, except for Walters. And then whoever else listens to this.
Well, he can learn.
He can learn. Essentially what happens is, if you've ever seen the movie 12 Angry Men, imagine that at night, and you're vampires. That's kind of what goes on. So it's people bitching and moaning and conniving and intrigue film noir style.
But that's the point.
That's the point. As vampires, so these immortal beings, these monsters that go bump in the night, right? But they're kind of trying to be still human in a way. I'm so ready to learn.
Yeah, there's the concept of the masquerade, where you're
right.
Technically, your character's not supposed to tell everyone, "Hey, look at me. Yep, vampire."
Right, because the idea is that, or if you've seen Underworld, then it's the same thing. Vampires try to stay, out of the limelight for obvious reasons. There's a pun there. So, what happens inevitably in these games is people will say things like, okay, we're going to set this in Chicago, and no one's been to Chicago. And so just imagine, you know your city, and that means you know how long it takes to get from point A to point B. You know the kinds of terrain there are there. You know the kind of weather there is. And all of that absolutely factors into what you decide to do. For example, in Kentucky, if it's fucking January 30th, and we're like, hey, let's run outside real fast, and, you're not going to do that. Why? It's obvious, right? Or, I'll just go downtown really quick. It's about 5 p.m. It's not going to happen, right? Like, if you have to be down there, if there's a scene that's running, and it takes you an hour to get there and an hour to get back, that changes the world, right? This happens in Vampire LARPs all the time. So Daniel had this idea, why don't we just have a map, and we'll actually, straight up dictate, this is how long everything happens. This is how long it takes to get here. Here are the main roads. You've got to use these things, and anyone that lives in Nolans knows this. So, hey, player base, You got to read this shit and know it. If you don't know it, that's fine. It's fine for your character not to know things. However, you still have to abide by them because that's the world. The world, it's built on those pillars, right? And we really tried to do a lot of world building and to say things like, how about economy? How about politics? If players wanted to get into that, they could. And we'd written like quite a bit of stuff dealing with it.
Well, the other, I will add, the other reason that I wanted to use a map, and I think it's a really good idea for
a Vampire
LARP, or anything that's just sort of, or say a Call of Cthulhu, anything that's sort of set in the modern day world, and set in a particular place, is if someone says, well, I want to go to a hospital. Okay, which hospital? Which hospital are you going to? Oh, we could make one up. Well, I mean, you could. But if it's set in a real-world city, you might as well just incorporate the landmarks and places into your actual game. It'll make it more real and just overall enhance the quality of your game, especially if you're actually thinking about these things from the beginning.
So this gets into a little bit of game system theory, and I have a whole thing about it. I've got a big old fucking warm chubby over game system theory.
Is there such a thing as it relates to RPGs?
Yeah, I'm not talking about game theory. I'm talking about game system theory.
Okay.
Which is a huge distinction. One is an academic study. One kind of tried to be in the mid-90s, and it ended in 2005 with a student named Ron Edwards. He was not the one who came up with it. Game system theory is the idea of people play games. It's one of the things, there's a guy named Jonathan Haidt who I've been reading, and his whole deal, one of his deals is saying the smarter the species, the more play they need. So humans play games as fucking adults, right? Why do we do that? Like, why are games important? Why is gambling important? I'm not talking about the gambling of like making money. I mean like the idea of playing a game. Why is that important? It's because we're really smart and we need, we have this drive to use our brains to figure shit out. You can watch Jonathan Haidt if you want to.
Did he create a game system or?
No. He's kind of a moral psychologist / philosopher. Right. He wrote The Righteous Mind, and it's something that I'm reading with a book club. Regardless, the point is this: dude named Ron Edwards, who I don't know much about, but you can Wikipedia it if you wish. He wrote, or he was a part of this thing called The Forge, which Megan and I have talked about. And one of the things they tried to do in their discussions, and this is debatable, is to look at primarily tabletop RPGs and say, what are the kinds of games that there really are? Let's have a categorization of them. And they came down to 3 kinds. One is gamist. This is like a video game. You win or you lose. You're trying to win. One is simulationist. It's not really about winning and losing. It's about being in that world. So for example, I would say if you were to play a game in like Fallout, like as in a tabletop game, not a video game, then almost by dint of that series, it needs to feel like Fallout. Almost to the point of like Star Wars games. A lot of times they're simulationists. You have to abide by the rules of Star Wars. If you don't, you're not playing Star Wars anymore. So that's simulationist. And then the third kind is narrative or story now. The differentiation of these we can go into later. Ben and I actually already did in one of the previous game talks. But the reason I'm bringing it up is while we've been talking about world building and really having strong foundations for your world, whether it's a book, a story, whether it's a module you're writing, whether it's a game system you have created, or a LARP you're running, you can make it simulationist. You can be like, you're in Nolan's. So you have the music going when you walk in. And a LARP is a live action role play. So imagine a Halloween costume party, but there's like some rules and kind of like a murder mystery, and you're all vampires. That's kind of it. You're always supposed to be in character is the idea. You got, let's say, simulationists. You've got the music going. Everyone's in their weird Nolan style, what have you. People are like playing over there. People are using Creole, and it's all about the feel of that LARP, right? You could totally do that. And to do it, obviously, you would have to be incredibly detail-oriented. That's kind of the simulationist jam. But what we're talking about doesn't necessarily mean you have to be simulationist. You could be gamist all fucking day. What we're talking about is things need to make sense in the story. That's it. And whether you're playing any of these games, the setting's got to make sense. If it doesn't make sense, then you can't have that suspension of disbelief, which means you're never going to have players really get that into it.
And sometimes the setting can actually give you an idea of where you want to take the story. There's a concept in science fiction that I've heard where where the science supposedly drives the story. In other words, and there's been a lot of other discussion about it.
Well, Star Trek is all about that. The idea of you have to solve an equation. For example, how deep into Star Trek should I go?
Probably you'll easily get deeper than I've actually been because I've watched some Star Trek. I've watched the original series and I've watched The Next Generation. I've watched a little of Deep Space Nine.
It takes a while to get into.
Yeah. I'll say I'm definitely much more versed in Star Trek than Star Wars.
Fair enough. So,
go for it.
One of the things that drives, at least, and I'm not, by the way, I am not talking about Star Trek Picard. I'm not going to, as in, right now I'm not referencing it. And I'm not talking about Star Trek Discovery either. Those asides as exceptions. One of these sort of tenets of Star Trek is its cutting edge technology, maybe beyond what we have right now, right? So just think about the 60s Captain Kirk, Spock, Star Trek.
In the Star Trek world, there's no magic per se, just really advanced technology. By the way, apparently Brian Walter's getting married tomorrow.
You're getting married tomorrow?